I helped my mother-in-law move. Then I found what she'd been hiding from our family for decades. I never imagined I'd be the one to uncover a secret that could shatter my husband's entire world. The kind of revelation you see in movies or read about in novels. Never something that happens in your own life. Yet here I am, carrying the weight of a truth I'm not sure I have the right to share. My relationship with Eleanor, my mother-in-law, has always been what you might call cordially distant. From the moment James introduced us 5 years ago, I could sense her quiet disappointment. I wasn't what she had envisioned for her only son, a Harvard-educated lawyer with a promising career ahead of him. I was just a nurse from a small town in Ohio with no prestigious family connections or impressive pedigree to speak of. We met at a hospital fundraiser where James was representing his law firm. I was working that night, helping coordinate the medical staff's volunteer efforts. He spilled his champagne on my uniform when someone bumped into him, and he was so apologetic that I couldn't help but laugh. He asked for my number to pay for dry cleaning. Instead, we ended up having coffee the next morning before my shift. 6 months later, we were engaged, despite his mother's obvious reservations. Eleanor comes from old Boston money, the kind of family that has buildings named after them at prestigious universities. Her marriage to Richard Aldridge, a brilliant attorney from a similarly distinguished background, was considered a perfect match in their social circle. James grew up surrounded by privilege and expectation, though to his credit, he's never been defined by it. He has his father's sharp intellect, but none of the pretension I've seen in photos of Richard, always perfectly posed in expensive suits, expressions serious even at family gatherings. Eleanor never said anything explicitly unkind. That wasn't her style. She operated with a refined, almost imperceptible disapproval. A slight pause before responding to my comments at dinner, the way she'd subtly correct my table etiquette, her persistent suggestions about more suitable careers I might consider. Have you ever thought about hospital administration, dear? With your people skills, you could really excel. Always delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Our wedding was a study in compromise. Eleanor had envisioned a grand affair at the Boston Symphony Hall with hundreds of guests, many of whom James and I had never met. I wanted something smaller, more intimate. We settled on a garden ceremony at her Beacon Hill home, with a guest list that still seemed excessive to me, but was embarrassingly modest, according to Eleanor. She insisted on selecting the florist, the caterer, the photographer, all people she'd used for charity events over the years. I conceded on most points, choosing my battles carefully. The dress was mine to select, though she managed to get in a subtle dig about how brave it was to choose something so modern for a traditional ceremony. James either didn't notice these undercurrents or chose to ignore them. "Mom's just old-fashioned," he'd say. "She'll warm up to you eventually." But 5 years into our marriage, that warmth remained elusive. We settled into a routine of mandatory Sunday dinners at her elegant brownstone, where I'd smile and nod while she reminisced about James's childhood and the promising future that awaited him. I became adept at maintaining pleasant conversation while keeping my true self safely hidden behind a polite facade. I remember the first Christmas I spent with them. I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gift for Eleanor, eventually finding a vintage brooch that matched one she'd inherited from her mother, but had lost years ago. When she opened it, her expression flickered with something like genuine appreciation, but quickly reset to her usual controlled smile. "How thoughtful," she said, before setting it aside to admire the cashmere sweater her friend Judith had sent. The brooch disappeared into a drawer, never to be worn. That same Christmas, I accidentally broke an ornament while helping decorate the tree. A delicate glass reindeer that apparently had belonged to Richard's family for generations. Eleanor didn't raise her voice or show obvious anger. She simply said, "Don't worry about it, dear. It was just an irreplaceable family heirloom," then swept up the pieces while I stood there, mortified. Later, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone how some things just can't be entrusted to certain people, and I knew exactly what and who she meant. Over time, I stopped trying so hard. Our relationship crystallized into something predictable, mutual tolerance for James's sake. We were two women who loved the same man, but shared little else in common. I made peace with it, or at least I convinced myself I had. The tension only truly surfaced during discussions about children. Eleanor would casually mention how wonderful James had looked in the Aldridge family christening gown, or how the Aldridge genetic traits for intelligence tended to skip a generation. The implication was clear. She worried my genes would dilute the precious Aldridge bloodline. I wanted children, but each passive-aggressive comment made me more determined to establish our own family traditions, free from Eleanor's influence. These unspoken battles left me emotionally drained after each visit. Everything changed last month when Eleanor announced she was selling her brownstone and moving to a smaller apartment in a modern building across town. The news surprised everyone, especially James. She had lived in that house for over 30 years. It was where she had raised James after his father died, where every corner held memories of their life together. "It's time for a change," was all she offered when James questioned the sudden decision. At my age, one needs to simplify. Something about the explanation felt off to me. Eleanor had always prided herself on maintaining family traditions and preserving the Aldridge legacy. The brownstone was as much a symbol of that legacy as anything else they owned. Selling it seemed completely out of character. When I gently asked if there were financial concerns, she dismissed the question with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Don't be ridiculous, Abigail. The Aldridges have never had financial difficulties. Even in the face of this unexpected decision, she managed to maintain her air of unflappable dignity. The moving company she hired was the same one that had relocated Boston's former mayor. The real estate agent was an old family friend who assured her the property would be marketed only to the right sort of buyers. Everything would be handled with the appropriate level of discretion and taste. James was concerned. Eleanor was 72, still sharp and independent, but the brownstone represented stability and continuity. When he couldn't take time off work to help with the move due to an important case, he looked to me with that hopeful expression I could never refuse. "Could you help Mom sort through her things? I'd feel better knowing someone was there with her." I agreed, despite my reservations. Perhaps this was an opportunity to finally break through the invisible wall between us. Or maybe I was just being naive. Eleanor seemed equally unenthusiastic about our impending time together, but necessity outweighed personal preference. "I suppose I could use an extra pair of hands?" she conceded when James called to tell her I'd be coming. "There's quite a lot to sort through." That was an understatement. The brownstone was a museum of carefully preserved artifacts from a life I knew little about. Crystal vases from vacations abroad, leather-bound books collected over decades, silver-framed photographs documenting James's journey from chubby-cheeked toddler to serious young lawyer. Everything meticulously arranged, as if her home had been staged for a perpetual open house that no one was actually invited to attend. My first morning there, Eleanor greeted me at the door in a perfectly pressed blouse and slacks, her silver hair styled immaculately, as if preparing for a dinner party rather than a day of dusty packing. She had already sorted some items into categories: keep, donate, consider, with handwritten labels in her elegant script. "I thought we'd start in the kitchen," she said, leading me through the house. "Most of it will be coming with me, but there are serving pieces I haven't used in years that could probably be donated." The first day of packing was awkward but uneventful. We worked in different rooms, Eleanor in her bedroom, carefully wrapping delicate porcelain figurines in tissue paper, while I tackled the kitchen, wrapping dishes and glasses in newspaper. We spoke little, the silence punctuated only by practical questions about boxes and packing tape. During our lunch break, a salad she had prepared the night before, served on fine china despite the circumstances. Eleanor surprised me by asking about my work at the hospital. She had never shown much interest in my career before, usually changing the subject when I mentioned my patients or the challenges of the healthcare system. "It must be difficult," she said, delicately spearing a piece of lettuce with her fork, "seeing people at their most vulnerable." "It is," I agreed, caught off guard by her apparent interest. "But it's also a privilege. People let you into their lives during their darkest moments. There's something profound about that." She nodded thoughtfully. "Richard, James's father, used to say something similar about his legal work, that people came to him when they were in crisis, and it was his responsibility to carry some of that burden for them." It was the first time she had voluntarily mentioned Richard to me, without it being part of a story designed to impress upon me the Aldridge family greatness. There was something different in her tone, a softness I hadn't heard before. "You must miss him very much," I said carefully, not wanting to break whatever spell had prompted this moment of genuine conversation. "Every day," she replied simply, "for 30 years. Then, as if catching herself revealing too much, she straightened her spine and returned to her usual brisk tone. "We should finish the kitchen this afternoon. The movers will be here next Monday, and there's still so much to do." By evening, I was exhausted, but strangely satisfied. We had made progress, and there had been that brief moment of connection, like a small crack in the wall between us. When I left, Eleanor thanked me with uncharacteristic warmth. "You've been very helpful today, Abigail. I appreciate it." On the drive home, I called James to update him. "It went better than expected," I told him. "Your mother and I actually had a nice conversation over lunch." "Really?" He sounded pleasantly surprised. "What about?" "My work, actually, and she mentioned your father." "Wow," James said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Mom almost never talks about Dad, especially not with people outside the family. He caught himself, but I understood what he meant. Despite 5 years of marriage, I was still considered an outsider in some ways. She loved him very much, didn't she? I asked. James was quiet for a moment. Yeah, they had one of those storybook marriages, partners in everything. That's why she never remarried, I think. No one could ever measure up to what they had. His words stayed with me as I drove. The perfect marriage, the ideal partnership, the standard against which James measured his own life and relationships. I wondered, not for the first time, if I measured up in his mind to the ideal set by his parents. On the second day, Eleanor asked me to help with the study, a room I'd rarely entered during our visits. It was a masculine space, preserved almost as a shrine to James's late father, Richard. Heavy oak bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound law books and economic treatises. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a green banker's lamp and a silver letter opener. Richard was very particular about his space, Eleanor explained, her voice softening as it always did when she mentioned her late husband. Everything had to be just so. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Richard had died before I met James, but his presence still loomed large in the family mythology. A brilliant corporate attorney who had died too young, a heart attack at 52, leaving Eleanor a widow and James fatherless at 15. In the photos scattered throughout the house, he appeared stern and imposing, his expression serious even in family vacation snapshots. James is so much like him sometimes, Eleanor said, running her hand over the polished surface of the desk. The way he furrows his brow when he's thinking, the way he organizes his thoughts when presenting an argument. Pure Richard. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had ever paid me about my relationship with her son, acknowledging that he had indeed inherited his father's admirable qualities, despite his poor choice in a spouse. We should start with the bookshelves, Eleanor directed, the moment of reminiscence over. Most of these will be donated to the university library. Richard would have wanted that. I began carefully removing books from their shelves, wiping away dust that had accumulated over the years. Eleanor sorted them into piles: keep, donate, consider. She worked methodically, occasionally pausing to leaf through a volume that held some special significance. This was a first edition he found in London during our honeymoon, she would say. Or he referenced this case study in the Brookings merger, his first major corporate case. Each book seemed to hold a memory, a piece of the Richard Aldridge legend. I tried to imagine James in 30 years, telling stories about his legal victories to our children or grandchildren. Would I be as prominent in those stories as Richard was in Eleanor's reminiscences? Or would I be a minor character, present but not essential to the narrative? It was mid-afternoon when I reached the bottom shelf behind the desk, an awkward spot that required me to kneel on the floor and reach back into the shadows. My fingers brushed against something that wasn't a book, a wooden box pushed far back against the wall, almost as if it had been deliberately hidden. I found something. I called to Eleanor, who was across the room cataloging a collection of first editions. I pulled the box forward into the light. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of dark walnut with a simple brass clasp. No dust had gathered on its surface, unlike everything else on the bottom shelf. Someone had handled this recently. Eleanor turned, and I saw her face change, a flash of something like panic quickly masked with practiced composure. "That's just some old paperwork," she said dismissively. "Nothing important. We can put it straight into the moving pile." But there was something in her voice, a slight tremor, unusual for someone who prided herself on self-control. My curiosity was piqued. "Should I pack it with the other personal documents?" I asked, running my hand over the smooth wooden surface. "I'll take care of it," Eleanor replied, crossing the room with surprising speed for a woman her age. She reached for the box, but her sleeve caught on the corner of a bookshelf, causing her to stumble slightly. In that moment of distraction, the clasp on the box popped open, and several documents slid onto the carpet. I instinctively bent to gather them, my eyes catching a glimpse of official letterhead and what looked like bank statements. "I said I'll handle it." Eleanor's voice was sharp now, all pretense of calm vanishing. But it was too late. I had already seen enough to understand that these weren't ordinary papers. They were financial statements, property deeds, and what appeared to be lease agreements, all for an address I didn't recognize in a town about 30 miles away. And all of them were recent. As I gathered the papers, a photograph slipped out from between two folders, a color snapshot from what looked like the 1980s, judging by the fashion and film quality. It showed a woman with dark hair holding a young girl of maybe 6 or 7. They were standing in front of a modest Cape Cod-style house with blue shutters. The woman was smiling directly at the camera, comfortable and familiar with the photographer. The girl was holding a stuffed rabbit, her expression serious but content. "What are these?" I asked, my confusion evident as I held a mortgage statement dated just 3 months prior in one hand and the photograph in the other. Eleanor sank into Richard's desk chair, looking suddenly every one of her 72 years. The carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing a vulnerability I'd never witnessed in her before. "This isn't how I wanted anyone to find out," she said quietly. "Find out what?" I was still trying to process what I was seeing. "Eleanor, what is all this?" She took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt in a habitual gesture of composure gathering. "Richard had another family," she said finally, each word seeming to cost her tremendous effort. "A woman named Caroline, and a daughter, Rebecca." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I sat down hard on the floor, the documents still clutched in my hands. "What do you mean, another family?" "Exactly what it sounds like," Eleanor replied, her voice steady now, as if relief at finally speaking the truth outweighed the pain of the revelation. "An affair that started before we were even married. She was his secretary at the firm. Such a cliché, isn't it?" I stared at her, unable to reconcile this bombshell with the perfect family narrative that had been presented to me for years. Richard, the devoted husband. Richard, the ethical lawyer. Richard, the moral compass by which James measured his own life. Does James have a half-sister? I struggled to form coherent questions. "Yes, Rebecca is 3 years older than James. She lives in Hartford now, I believe, a teacher." My mind was racing. "You knew? All this time?" Eleanor laughed, a sharp, brittle sound without humor. "Of course I knew. I confronted Richard about it when James was just a baby. He admitted everything, but refused to end it. Said he loved us both, couldn't choose. The great Richard Aldrich, unable to make a decision. Her voice dripped with decades-old bitterness. But you stayed with him. It was 1980, dear. I was a housewife with an infant son and an art history degree I'd never used. What exactly were my options? She gestured to the papers in my hand. Richard set them up in that house, promised to provide for them always. After he died, I continued the payments. I looked down at the mortgage statement. You're still supporting them after all this time? Caroline, yes. Rebecca is on her own now. But Caroline never remarried. She had no career, no other means of support. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Richard made me promise on his deathbed that I would ensure they were taken care of. His last request, can you imagine? After everything, that's what he asked of me. And you've kept that promise all these years. I was struggling to process it all. Does James know any of this? No. The word hung in the air between us. And he never will if I have anything to say about it. But Eleanor, this changes everything. His entire understanding of his father. Exactly, she cut me off. His entire understanding, the foundation upon which he's built his life, his career choices, his sense of who he is. She leaned forward. What good would it do him to learn that his father lived a lie? That the man he's idolized and emulated was a common cheat who couldn't even honor his marriage vows? I had no answer for that. The selfish part of me wanted to agree with her, to pack the box away and pretend I'd never seen it. But another part felt the weight of this deception, this massive family secret that had shaped all their lives without their knowledge. The brownstone, I said suddenly, pieces falling into place. You're selling it to continue supporting Caroline, aren't you? The money's running out. Eleanor nodded, looking away. Richard's investments didn't perform as well as expected in recent years. The trust fund he established is nearly depleted. I've been supplementing it from my own accounts, but... She gestured vaguely around the study. This house is my last significant asset. But I thought, the Aldrich family wealth? Appearances can be deceiving, Eleanor said with a wry smile. Richard's legal practice was successful? Yes, but he was supporting 2 households. And after the crash in 2008, many investments that seemed solid turned to dust. I've been careful, frugal even, despite what it might look like to an outsider. I thought about all the designer clothes, the catered Sunday dinners, the carefully maintained image of affluence. Had it all been a facade these last years? Does no one in your social circle know about any of this? The financial struggles? Caroline? Rebecca? Eleanor's face hardened. Absolutely not. And they never will. In my world, Abigail, reputation is everything. The Aldrich name still means something in Boston. I won't have it tarnished, not while I'm alive to prevent it. The magnitude of her sacrifice hit me. For 30 years, she had not only lived with her husband's betrayal, but had also continued to honor his wishes after his death, financially supporting the woman he'd cheated with, even to the point of selling her own home. Why not just stop? I asked. After all this time, after what he did to you, why keep paying? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Because I loved him, she said simply. Despite everything, I loved Richard, and keeping my promise to him, ensuring his peace of mind even in death, it gave purpose to the pain. She looked directly at me. Besides, Caroline was as much a victim as I was. Richard was persuasive, charismatic. He made each of us feel like the center of his world. I thought about James, so like his father in appearance, with the same confident charm and easy smile. The idea that he might also carry Richard's capacity for deception made my stomach clench. Have you ever met her, Caroline, or Rebecca? Eleanor shook her head. No, it was better that way, but I've known of their existence for 35 years, seen photos Richard kept, even read letters. Her mouth twisted in a bitter smile. He wasn't particularly careful about hiding them, almost as if he wanted me to know but couldn't bring himself to tell me directly. Was he present in their lives? Did he spend time with them? The implications for James's childhood were staggering. All those late nights at the office, business trips, weekend conferences. How many had actually been spent with his other family? Yes, he split his time between us. Holidays were particularly difficult. He'd be with us Christmas morning, then claim a work emergency in the afternoon. Rebecca's birthday was in December, you see? I tried to imagine the psychological toll, knowing your husband was leaving your celebration to go to his other family, wondering if he was happier there, more relaxed, more himself. James never suspected anything. Children see what they expect to see, Eleanor said, and I was careful to shield him from my own pain. As far as James was concerned, his father was a busy, successful attorney who loved him deeply and occasionally had to miss events because of work commitments, which was true as far as it went. You won't tell him, will you? Eleanor asked, a note of pleading in her voice that I'd never heard before. It would destroy him to learn this about his father, and for what purpose? Richard is gone, the damage is done. But the lies continue, I countered. James visits his father's grave every year on his birthday. He quotes his ethical principles in court arguments. His whole identity is wrapped up in being Richard Aldridge's son. And he is Richard's son? Eleanor said firmly. That much is true. Richard loved him desperately. Whatever his failings as a husband, he was a devoted father. To both his children? I couldn't help asking. Eleanor's expression tightened. Yes, according to Caroline's letters over the years, he was equally committed to Rebecca. Attended her school events, helped with homework, taught her to ride a bike, all the things he did with James. She paused. Richard's fatal heart attack actually occurred on the way home from Rebecca's high school graduation ceremony. He had told me he was at a partner's retreat. Even in death, the lies continued. We sat in silence, the box of secrets open between us. I thought about James coming home later, asking innocently how the packing had gone. The burden of knowing something that would change how he saw his entire childhood, his father, his mother, even himself. Who else knows about this? I asked eventually. Richard's brother, Charles, knows. He helped establish the trust fund after Richard's death. Beyond that, no one that matters. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, gathering her composure. And now, you. I need time to think, I finally said. Eleanor nodded, carefully gathering the scattered papers and returning them to the box. For what it's worth, she said quietly, you're nothing like I expected when James brought you home. I thought you'd be temporary, another of his passing fascinations. But you've proven to be far stronger than I gave you credit for. Coming from Eleanor, it was practically a declaration of love. Is that why you've been so distant? You thought I wouldn't last? She considered this. Partly, but also, you reminded me of Caroline in some ways. Your directness, your lack of pretension. She gave a small, sad smile. I suppose I was afraid James was repeating his father's pattern, drawn to someone completely different from the world he was raised in. The comparison unsettled me. Was I really anything like the woman Richard had chosen over his wife? Was James unconsciously following his father's footsteps by marrying outside his social circle? The rest of the day passed in a fog. We continued packing, speaking only when necessary, the weight of the revelation hanging between us. When I left that evening, Eleanor pressed the box into my hands. Perhaps it's better if you keep this for now, she said, until you decide. At home, I hid the box in my closet behind winter sweaters. When James asked about the day, I spoke of dusty books and china cabinets, keeping my voice light and even, the first deliberate lie of our marriage. That night, I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, thinking about families and the secrets they keep. About Eleanor, who had sacrificed her own happiness to preserve her son's idealized image of his father. About Caroline, the other woman, who had spent her life in the shadows of someone else's marriage. About Rebecca, who may or may not know the truth of her parentage. And about James, blissfully unaware that his entire understanding of his family history was built on carefully constructed lies. I thought about my own family, straightforward, working-class people from Ohio. No grand pretensions, no hidden scandals that I knew of. My parents had celebrated their 40th anniversary last year with a backyard barbecue attended by lifelong friends and neighbors. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was honest. What would they think of the situation I now found myself in? In the morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the address on the mortgage statement. I told myself I just wanted to see the house, to make the situation more real in my mind. But I knew, deep down, that I was hoping for something more, some insight that would make my decision clearer. The house was modest but well-maintained, a small Cape Cod with blue shutters and a carefully tended garden, just like in the photograph. As I sat in my car across the street, the front door opened and a woman emerged, 60-ish, with silver-streaked dark hair and a graceful way of moving that seemed oddly familiar. "Carolyn?" She bent to pick up a newspaper, then paused, looking directly at my car with a questioning expression. I drove away quickly, heart pounding. What had I expected to achieve? Did I think seeing Richard's mistress in person would make me feel more righteous in my indecision? More justified in potentially keeping this secret from my husband? Back at home, I opened the wooden box again, this time examining the contents more carefully. Beyond the financial documents were personal items, handwritten letters from Caroline to Richard, spanning decades. Notes about Rebecca's achievements in school, health concerns, future plans. There were more photographs, Rebecca as a toddler, as a teenager, in a cap and gown at her college graduation. Richard appeared in some of them, looking more relaxed than in any of the formal portraits at Eleanor's house. One letter in particular caught my attention. Dated just a month before Richard's death, Caroline wrote of her concerns about the future, about what would happen to her and Rebecca if anything happened to him. "You've always taken care of us, and I trust you always will," she wrote. "But sometimes I worry about our vulnerability. Everything is in your name. We have no legal claim, no protection. Had Richard been contemplating changing his will, officially acknowledging his second family? Was that why he extracted the promise from Eleanor on his deathbed? Because he knew he had failed to secure their future in any legally binding way. Over the next several days, I continued helping Eleanor with the move while wrestling with my conscience. We developed a strange camaraderie, two women bound by a secret neither had wanted to share. She told me more about her life with Richard, both the public version everyone knew and the private reality she had endured. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, she confided one afternoon as we wrapped crystal stemware in paper. It was the loneliness, knowing something so devastating and having no one to tell. Maintaining the charade for the sake of social standing, for James's stability. She carefully placed a wrapped glass in a box. I wouldn't wish that kind of isolation on anyone. I realized with sudden clarity that she was warning me, telling me what my life would become if I chose to keep this secret from James. A life of isolation, of maintaining appearances at the cost of authentic connection. Did you ever consider leaving him? I asked. After you found out? Of course, several times. Eleanor's hands continued their methodical wrapping. I consulted a divorce attorney once when James was around 5, but Richard made it clear that he would fight for custody, and with his connections, his resources, he might have won. I couldn't risk losing James, so I stayed on my terms. Your terms? She gave a small, grim smile. I insisted on separate bedrooms. I managed our social calendar, ensuring we maintained the appearance of the perfect couple. I took control of our finances, a considerable feat in the 1980s, let me tell you. And I extracted promises that he would never, ever let his other life intrude on James's. I saw Eleanor in a new light, not just the proper Boston society matron, but a fierce protector of her son and her dignity. A woman who had made painful compromises, but had never completely surrendered her autonomy. And Rebecca, did you ever resent her? She was innocent in all this. Eleanor paused, considering. Not resent, exactly, but I couldn't bear to hear about her. Any mention of her achievements, her milestones. It was salt in an open wound. Another reminder that Richard's love, his time, his attention were divided. She sighed. Now, at my age, I can see that she was as much a victim of Richard's choices as James was, as all of us were. On our last day of packing, Eleanor showed me a photo album I'd never seen before. Pictures of her and Richard in the early days of their relationship. They looked so young, so hopeful. In one photo, they were dancing at some formal event, gazing at each other with genuine adoration. We were happy once, she said softly, before the deceptions began. That's what makes everything that came after so tragic. It didn't have to be this way. Yesterday, Eleanor moved into her new apartment. James and I helped her arrange furniture, hang pictures, place familiar objects in unfamiliar spaces. As we worked, I watched my husband, his gentle patience with his mother, his meticulous attention to detail as he assembled bookshelves, so reminiscent of the father he believed he knew. At one point, he was hanging a large portrait of Richard in the living room, the formal oil painting that had dominated Eleanor's dining room for decades. I noticed him studying his father's face, as if looking for himself in those aristocratic features. Do you think he'd be proud of me? James asked his mother, an unexpected vulnerability in his voice. Of the work I'm doing? The cases I'm taking? Oh, James, he would be immensely proud, Eleanor replied, and I heard the absolute truth in her words, despite everything else that might have been false in their family narrative. You were everything to him. When it was time to leave, Eleanor hugged me, the first genuine embrace we'd ever shared. Whatever you decide, she whispered, I want you to know that I understand. Now I sit here, the wooden box open before me, its contents spread across our dining room table. James is working late, as he often does, dedicated to following in his father's professional footsteps. The irony is almost too much to bear. What is the right thing to do? Tell him the truth and watch his world collapse? Or protect him with the same lie his mother has maintained for decades? I think about the conversations James and I have had about starting our own family. His desire for children has always been tinged with a certain anxiety, a fear that he wouldn't measure up to the father he remembered. Dad always seemed to know exactly what to do, what to say, he told me once. I'm not sure I could ever be that kind of father. If only he knew how flawed, how human his father really was. Would that knowledge free him from the impossible standard he's set for himself? Or would it destroy his sense of identity, of heritage, of belonging? I think about Rebecca, the half-sister he's never known. They share blood, history, a father. Should they have the chance to know each other? What right do I have to keep them apart by maintaining Eleanor's decades-long deception? And what about our future children? Would they someday have a right to know about their aunt, their additional family history? Or would this secret follow us through generations, shaping relationships in ways we cannot foresee? I think about Eleanor, giving up her home to keep a promise to a man who betrayed her. I think about Caroline, living her life in parallel to ours, connected by invisible threads of obligation and secrecy. I think about James, whose entire sense of self is built around emulating a father who led a double life. And I think about myself, now the keeper of a truth I never asked to know. My finger traces the edge of one of Rebecca's childhood photographs, James's half-sister, a stranger who shares his DNA, his father's smile, perhaps even some of his mannerisms and talents. Does she know about James? Has she wondered about her father's other family through the years? Does she resent the legitimate son who inherited the Aldridge name, the social standing, the uncomplicated legacy? I pick up my phone and stare at it, contemplating a call to Eleanor. She could absolve me of this responsibility, tell me to destroy the evidence, maintain the fiction, the easy path. I could go back to our life without this knowledge weighing on me. But would our relationship ever truly be the same? Could I look at James across the dinner table, knowing what I know about his father, about the sister he's never met, and not feel the wall of secrecy between us? Would every conversation about family, about children, about integrity be tainted by my complicity in this decades-long deception? My mother always told me that relationships built on lies eventually collapse under their own weight. But she'd never faced a situation like this, where the truth seemed as destructive as the deception. I gather the papers together, returning them to the wooden box, and close the lid. The brass clasp clicks into place with a finality that seems to echo in our empty apartment. For now, at least, I am the keeper of the Aldridge family secret. The responsibility sits heavy on my shoulders, a burden I never sought, but cannot easily set down. James's key turns in the lock, and I quickly slide the box under the sofa. He enters with his usual warm smile, briefcase in hand, loosening his tie as he crosses the room to kiss me. "How's Mom settling in?" he asks, dropping onto the couch beside me. "Did you two survive a whole week together without incident?" I force a smile. "Better than survived. I think we might have actually bonded a little." "Really?" His eyes light up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful. I've always hoped you two would eventually connect." He takes my hand, squeezes it gently. What happened? What indeed? How to explain the strange intimacy that comes from sharing someone's darkest secret? The unexpected compassion I found for a woman I'd previously seen only as cold and judgmental. "I think I understand her better now," I say carefully. "She's not exactly who I thought she was." "People rarely are once you get to know them," James says, with no idea how profoundly true his casual observation is. "I'm glad you got to see beyond the proper Boston matron facade. There's a lot more to Mom than she lets most people see." If only he knew. Later that night, as James sleeps beside me, I stare at the ceiling, still turning over possibilities in my mind. Maybe there's a middle path, a way to honor the truth without destroying the foundations of James's world. Perhaps someday, when Eleanor is gone, when the shock would be less devastating, I could find a way to introduce James to his half-sister without revealing the full extent of his father's deception. Or perhaps the secret isn't mine to share at all. Perhaps my responsibility is simply to support Eleanor in her final years, to help her maintain the promise she made to her husband, and to let the past remain buried. I think about what I would want if I were James. Would I want to live in comfortable ignorance, or would I want the chance to know the full truth about my family, painful as it might be? Would I resent being denied the opportunity to know my half-sister, to decide for myself how to feel about my father's actions? There are no easy answers, no clearly right or wrong choices, only competing values, truth versus protection, honesty versus compassion, the right to know versus the mercy of not knowing. In the morning, I will meet Eleanor for coffee, a new ritual we've established since the move. We'll sit across from each other, two women bound by love for the same man, and knowledge of a secret that could destroy him. We'll discuss mundane things, her new apartment, my work schedule, plans for the holidays, while the unspoken weight of our shared knowledge hangs between us. And I'll continue to carry this burden, at least for now, watching James carefully for signs that he might be ready to learn the truth, waiting for the right moment, if such a moment ever comes, to decide whether to open the box of secrets or to lock it away forever. Sometimes the past is hidden for a reason, but whose peace am I protecting by keeping it secret? His or my own?